Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk about adding animation to your prototypes. Micro animation or micro interactions are used to provide visual feedback to a user that an action has taken place, like a hover or loading state. It can also be used in larger scale to add personality and make your product a delightful experience for users. Today, I feel like it'd be a good example to show using a simple bouncy ball animation. I don't know if any of you had grew up kind of playing around with a booklet of sticky notes and kind of how flip animations work. That's kind of the same thing we're going to go for here. Um, when you're doing any type of animation, it's good to think about your animation in different frames, thinking about what's going to be happening in the first frame, the first state, and then what happens, where's it going to land at the second frame, and so on and so on. Kind of the same way you would draw on a in a flip book if you were to animate that way, and kind of the same way that stop animators work. So in this example, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of show how to animate a ball kind of bouncing around in this box here. And the different ways that you can add character to this and make it almost feel more realistic by playing around with the speed, playing around with the distorting the shape as it goes around the box, different things like that. So what we're going to do here is we'll start off just by looking at the first frame. I have my ball up here in the top left corner. And what it's doing is it's going to go, I want this ball to bounce around the box. So it's going to go from this top left corner. And I want it to go I want it to kind of come down here and bounce on this wall, come down here, bounce on this wall. And then I want it to kind of go around, this box. So as I went through and did that, I thought about this, how I would break it up into different frames. So what it's going to do is it's going to travel from here over to this area right here, which I did. You can see in the second frame here. But in a realistic setting, the ball wouldn't just maintain its shape and wouldn't just hit the wall and then just bounce right off. It would actually kind of squish a bit. If we were to think about this more in a realistic setting, the way that kind of physics works is it would bounce off of that wall and it would actually squish a little bit, and it would actually it would squish and it would bounce off the wall. So what I did next is I actually took that ball and I squished it a little bit just to kind of match those physics of how this bouncy ball would actually work. So I had it squish, and then I had it extend back to its original shape, and then I had it bounce off the wall, and I had it actually move down to this bottom section. So just in 5 frames, as you see right there, in 5 frames I showed how it bounced off of that. It started out that top wall, bounced off of this wall. You can see how it actually kind of it squishes in, and then it extends back out, and then it bounces down to the next wall. And so what we did here is we just animated that first little bit of that interaction, first bit of that animation to come down and bounce off of this bottom section. So if I want to continue doing that using the same application that I've done with the physics of this, we're going to have that squish happen on the bottom too when it bounces off the bottom wall. So it's going to squish down, bounce back up. And it's almost like a recoil in a way, like it'll squish down and it'll kind of recoil back up, and it'll bounce up to this top section here, and I'll have to kind of do that same thing. I'll have it squish down, and so with some of these too, you might see it's kind of hard, but I did rotate it a little bit to kind of match the angle of where that ball is kind of squishing off of that wall. So I've used that approach, matching the physics for every single one of these bouncy balls. And then as it goes back to the top, what I did was I had this kind of bounce back into the direction of where I started off at. And I'll show you why I did that in a second. But mainly what I wanted to show you is why, by doing this, by thinking about the animation, trying to break this up into different frames, I'm able to use what I know about auto animate and what we learned in the auto animate section of prototyping to create a looping animation, so that as you go through these different frames or these different artboards, XD is going to fill in that information, and it's going to animate what's happening between those. So if I actually switch over to the prototype tab, you can see that I have every single one of these. This first, I'll talk about this trigger in a second, but I have this button that I put in here just to kind of use as a trigger to start this animation. But all that's going to do is it's going to animate so that when I tap on this trigger, it'll take me from this first frame to the second frame. But you could tell that I didn't just make it so that I have to click every single time. You could see that as I clicked once, you'll see that as I click once, it'll just kind of carry the animation all the way through, right? Um, and so what we're going to do here is I want to show you that you can have a button or anything be the initial trigger that will start your animation. But what happens if I want this to loop all the way through? I want it to continue the animation as I go, right? So what I did here is I said that when I go to the second frame, I start from my first to my second frame. After that, I want the animation to kind of continue to cycle through. I don't want to have to click a trigger every single time that I go through this. So what we're doing here actually is we said that from the second frame, there's actually a time trigger up here that we haven't discussed yet. So if I set the interaction to time, you can actually set a delay to 0 seconds, which basically means that after it triggers and the animation plays from the first to the second frame, it'll say that I want to just set the time to have a 0 delay to move to the next frame here. So I took the little arrow, I carried it over from the second to the third frame. I set the time, I set the trigger to time, and then a 0 delay. And basically that just means that once it goes through this first animation and it gets to this section or this next frame, it will then immediately cycle over to the next artboard. It'll go to this third artboard here. And I carried that over for every single one of these artboards. So you can see that I have my trigger set to 0 seconds. And that just means that as I go through every single one of these artboards, it's going to just automatically go and it's going to carry through and make this a continuous animation. So if I go all the way through this, you can see it kind of takes me back. I put this ball back in the same place of where we started. I want this to be able to take me back to the initial frame, that initial artboard, so that way I can start this animation back over, to be able to trigger this again if I wanted to. So what you can do is if you get back to this last artboard, I actually took that same animation, that line, that pick whip. I brought it back to that first frame. And so what I did is it said, okay, I want you to carry through using the time animation with 0 delay to carry through every single one of these animations, every single one of these artboards. And when I get to this last frame, I wanted to set back to that first frame. And so pretty much what it does is it will go through this entire animation, and when it gets to the last frame, it's actually going to immediately drop me back on this first frame here. And so if I show you what that looks like now, if I play this, I have this button here that I just use as a trigger. And so when I click on that, you'll kind of see how that bouncy ball kind of bounces around and how it goes through every single one of these frames. Now, I could probably, let me see if this will kind of go through. So you can see how when I select on the different artboards, you can see how it kind of starts off at that place in the animation. That's why I wanted to I thought it made sense to use this as an example, especially if you're someone who has, ever done stop animation, or you've, ever played with flipping, doing a little flip book animation. It's pretty much the same concept. You want to draw out those different stages of the animation, and think about that as you're putting together like a storyboard, or you're thinking about your animation. You want to sketch these things out. So if I play this again, what you'll see is it's not just a linear speed. It's not just a linear progression through the animation. You can see that it actually slows down in some parts, it speeds up in some parts, and that's actually going to be really important to your animation and trying to make it feel more natural and not feel so kind of robotic, or more, try not to make it feel so computer-like. So what we're going to do here is I want to just kind of show you how I played around with the speeds of these things. And this might take some time. It might just take a little bit of working with this to make it feel more natural. But I spent a good amount of time with this playing around with the easing settings and the duration settings and the speed of the animation to kind of make this animation feel a little bit more natural. So what I set for this is that when I click on this button, it's going to go from this first frame to the second frame. I have this set to 0.8 seconds, and I have the easing set to ease in. So when I click on that, if you see, just going from this first to second frame, you can see that it starts out slow and then speeds up near the end. And it takes a full 0.8 seconds to get from this first frame to the second frame. To go from here, you can see that because there is These three artboards here, 2, 3, and 4, is really just that animation of the ball hitting the wall, squishing down, and then kind of recoiling. We want that to be sped up a little bit. We don't want that to we don't want the ball to hit the wall, slowly squish into the wall, and then slowly squish out. We want it to be a little bit more of a faster process. So what you see here is I actually set easing to none, so that's going to be more of an immediate animation. So there's going to be the easing set to none. It's a much faster, so I have this 0.04 seconds. So it's going to squish down 0.04 seconds, and then it's going to kind of do the same thing. It'll 0.04 seconds back out to this, back out to where it was before. So it'll squish in and then recoil, and then from here, I have it set. It's still a pretty fast. Since the ball has kind of picked up some speed. If we're thinking about this from kind of like a physics standpoint, the way you would actually kind of throw, how it would actually look when you throw a ball, it's actually sped up a little bit more. So it's it hit the wall, it bounced off. Now we're going to bounce off this wall and down to this bottom corner here. I think it looks like I actually carried over that same speed, so 0.04 between all of these different triggers, and it looks like I have 0.05 here to squish down to this, and then I have 0.04 to recoil back out. And then this actually is a much a lot slower, because when it's in this bottom corner, it's actually going to move a lot faster because it's not going very far. So when it goes from here all the way back up to this top corner, it's traveling from here all the way up. We don't want that to feel too fast. And now that it's bounced off the wall, it has to go a little bit farther. It's going to slow down. So now we go from 0.04 seconds, and then from this bottom to the top part, it's going to bounce. It's actually going to be a little bit slower. So this is actually taking away 0.5 seconds to go back up to that top section. And then same thing, because it's going to recoil. Looks like I have this set to 0 seconds, which I think I must have done that on purpose. So it must have needed needed to be a little quicker to kind of recoil that. And then to go from the squished to the regular ball, it'll take 0.06 seconds. And then back out to move back up to this top section, it'll take 0.6 seconds. And in this last one, you see that I have ease out set. So for most of these, it's pretty much been a linear. It'll just continue all the way through. There's no speeding up or slowing down with the easing. Here, when I get to the last section, it actually is going to ease out. And so if I play that, looking at all the speed that we just looked at, if I play this again, you'll see that when I click bounce, it's slow in the beginning. It's definitely speeds up in this bottom corner because it doesn't have to go very far. But as it comes back up to this top section, it's gonna start to slow down because it's kind of losing that momentum that we had in the initial part of the animation. So I'll just play that one more time. And so when you're going through your animation, it's not necessary for you to play around with the speed and have to, try to get so specific with the easing. But that's a way to kind of add some more personality and kind of realism to your animation. So if you wanted to kind of get a more of a realistic effect with this. So that's kind of what you want to think about when you're going through your animation. Something else you can do too, thinking about micro animations, is that if I take this, this is actually more of a micro interaction, really, to kind of give the user the idea that something that they've done or something that they're interacting with is going to change states, to give them the sense that they're interacting with it. What I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to turn this into a component. Now, the only reason I'm making this a component is because I want to create a hover state for this. It is not necessary for you to create a component for everything. Components are typically something you want to use for large scale design projects, where you're going to be using that button in a lot of places. Right now, we're going to just be looking at this solely to create a hover state for this. So I have my default state here. I'm going to go up and I'm going to click this button, this little plus button, and that's going to generate another state. I can create a hover state by clicking this little drop down here. And what this does is I now have two different states for this, and right now I'm on the button that has a hover state. And so what I can do for this is I can actually go into my rectangle. This is the background of the button, and I'm just going to make this a little bit of a darker green. So what I'll do is you can see that right now I'm set on the hover state. I'm going to set this back to the default state. So what we're going to do is what we're doing right now is we're actually creating just a very small micro interaction that's saying I want to change the state of this button when I hover over it. So I'm going to go back to the default state, and I'm actually going to set a hover interaction for this. So let me. It looks like XD actually did that by default for me, which is nice. When I created that hover state, it actually already put that interaction in there for me. So when I switch to the hover state, you can see that now that I created that hover state, it actually added a trigger so that when I hover over this button, it's going to auto animate into that hover state. So if I take this button, I'm actually going to drop this into my prototype, which I'm going to put it off to the side since I don't have this linked to actually prototype with the rest of my animation. This is going to be separate. But if I select this and I preview this in the artboard, what I can do now is when I hover over it, you can actually see that the state changes. This is a much smaller scale. This is where that micro interaction kind of comes into play to really give that give functionality to your components. So that's just one way that you can create something like a hover state, and you can do this in different places. It can be on a button. You can have it be on a link. If you have a link that changes color, maybe turns into a blue when you hover over a link. There's different ways to add interactions and visual cues to the users that something is interactive by adding hover states. So I hope this was helpful. The biggest thing to remember with this, with creating micro animations, is that it might take extra frames, it might take extra artboards to get the effect that you're going for. So that's why it's important to maybe think about your interaction, think about your animation, and sketch out the frames first, and think about all the different steps it's going to take to go through your animation, and will kind of help you make it feel a little bit more realistic.